So, Tamara, I'm curious, what is the last podcast you
Oh,
listened to?
goodness. I listen to podcasts every day, Nicole. This is What the Frac, where we break down marketing trend strategies and tactics so that you can do the fun stuff like be creative. We are your hosts. I am Tamara.
And I'm Nicole, and today we're going to talk about the long game of AG1 and their podcast advertising. We're going to look at the fractional situation report where we break down all of the tactics, outcomes, everything you need to know as a fractional executive. And we talk about our wins and misses in the
I'm curious
marketing.
though, Nicole, before we actually dig into this, I'd like to hear people who are listening put a comment in this post if you have heard Athletic Greens advertised on a podcast and what you thought. I'm curious if there's anyone out there who hasn't heard them on a podcast. So, with that, let's get started into our situation report. Nicole, kick us off. What are we looking at here with Athletic Greens and what they've done?
Yeah, and Tamara, although that I consume this product every single day of my life, there's so many things I learned, and they are very open. Their CRO is very out there talking about, and their CEO are talking about this playing the long game. AG1 basically is this one product subscription health company. One product, that's it. Subscription health company that scaled from zero to $1.2 billion valuation since 2009 when it first launched. And I want to kind of go a little bit into the timeline here because it launched in 2009 when the CEO and the founder realized that he spent $35,000 on health tests and was not healthy. And so he started to figure out what he needed, what vitamins and supplements he needed, and started to build Athletic Greens. And in 2010, they won their first major influencer, Tim Ferriss. I mean, could you get a better influencer?
Yep.
Tim Ferriss is now an investor in AG1. And then in 2015 is when they rebranded to the AG1 we actually all love and know. So it was Athletic Greens in the beginning. You can look up online, you can see the old packaging. And AG1 is now what we know of, is started in 2015. And they've just seen an upward trajectory since. But one thing you may have noticed is that they have hit every podcast and influencer. You cannot go anywhere without hearing AG1, and that is their main tactic. Talking about having an in-house partnership team of 5 people that's dedicated to these podcast investments, and it's really paid off for them, Tamara.
For some startups, that's like your entire staff.
Right? Seriously. Seriously. And, we always talk about the outcomes here. And so, obviously, the good outcomes that AG1 wants is they want you to hear about AG1 from people you already trust and listen to, right? We know as marketers and as business owners that influencers, micro influencers, podcast hosts, people who are in our daily lives, consumers trust them and they build that trust. So they're learning from it about AG1 from those people. They're getting them curious because they've heard it enough times to be curious to check it out. And then once they check it out, they want to convert them into a monthly subscription of their one product. And then their bad outcomes they want to avoid here is not finding the right audience and spending a ton of money with little ROI. And then audiences getting sick of hearing about AG1, which I can totally see happening. So those are the things we're going to really dive deeper in today.
What I'm really curious about, because you bring out the bad outcome, and my initial reaction with the not finding the right audience is how hard it must be to try and find the right audience with a product, a wellness product, right? You're thinking about this as like a health and wellness product, and like some of the podcasts that I've heard it on are like political podcasts, right? So I'm super curious to see and dig into how do you really look at what is the right fit, or is there some A/B testing that goes into this? And like you look at more psychological demographics versus just what you think might fit.
Yep.
Right, which would be like, oh, a health and wellness podcast fits health and wellness drink. So yeah, I'm very curious about that.
And the CRO of the company has actually been very open about their strategy. So I was I was really surprised. I was expecting to make this deck that we always allow people to download to see, how we build these shows. And I knew I was going to see Tim Ferriss on there. I knew I was going to see Joe Rogan Experience on there. I knew I was going to see the Andrew Huberman, the Huberman Lab podcast. By the way, Andrew Huberman, after promoting it for 2 years, is now joined the company as a medical advisor. So just saying also a good product helps, right? That people actually like. But I was very surprised to see it on Pod Saves America, Crime Junkie,
Yeah.
Armchair Expert, right? These are podcasts that you wouldn't normally say, okay, health goes there, right? And one of the things that they
Yep.
really attribute this to is one, having that team that's dedicated to not only finding the correct audiences, knowing their buyers, knowing what their buyers like and where they need to be, but also very open about how do you monitor success, and then how do you get feedback loops to make sure you're hitting success all the time? And that's been really interesting. And I think that's a huge part that small businesses, startups generally forget about. And I want to also bring one more thing to the table here. They said their community is not just health people, right? They said their community, from their words, are people who are taking ownership of their health, their personal finances, and their relationships.
Oh, that's really
Mm-hmm.
interesting. That I mean, that really broadens how you look at your target audience.
Yeah.
Huh. I mean, but they've had time to test this, right? Like, I'm sure now they've got so much data on what their customers do, what they make, but I do like that. People who are taking not only ownership of their health, but their personal finances is an interesting twist to how they define their target audience or their key
Yeah.
persona.
It
Um,
really goes to show that
and
fringe, like it's not just about who you think is your ideal audience. It's really about like what is their lifestyle, right? If I'm selling to like CEOs of businesses, it shouldn't all be about the fact that they're CEOs, right? Like, what do CEOs do all the time? They want to get better or they want to personally develop, right? Like, they are doing things outside of just being CEOs. They're type A personalities. Maybe they like to work out or go to the gym and do other things, right? So, it was really interesting to see how thought out this marketing plan actually is.
But what I find interesting as I look at the touch points are a little bit less than you would think of, right? That you're kind of pointing out as the main touch points because you've got podcast, website, and ads. And I guess those main funnels just really, move people into the purchasing that they want, and they don't need to be everywhere. They've just fine-tuned where they're really good at grabbing new
Yeah.
customers or grabbing reoccurring
And
customers.
sometimes that's the best way,
Um,
because if you think about it, now they can fine tune that conversion. They can fine tune those funnels, like you said, right? They can really focus their time and energy into it. So I think that playing the long game is an interesting, this is their words. This is not our strategy here. I think it's really interesting because they are really setting themselves up for long-term engagements. They're setting themselves up to have to monitor success and think about feedback loops. And they have to build rules for when they're going to pivot, right? Because when you put all your eggs in one basket, the moment, let's say, Spotify decides they're going to take ads out of all podcasts, we may have to pivot, right? And so those are things to think about in this long-term strategy. So, Tamara, do you want to go a little bit deeper into, if someone was thinking about using this strategy for their own business, what are kind of some of the steps they need to take to go through that?
so yeah, I mean, if we look at this long-term strategy, it's really first knowing your audience will be the best thing you can do. So you want to do market research and build personas. You want to figure out where your ideal audience gets their information and trust. And I think trust is really the main thing, especially when you're looking at influencers or your podcasts, which they've now merged. Their podcasters are influencers, because this health and wellness, you really have to have trust in the person that you're buying it from,
Mhm.
right? It's almost like a medical thing. So trust is huge. Then you need to build a plan and a budget to achieve success, and you need to monitor your progress, but don't pivot too soon, right? Like, I think with podcast advertising, it's going to take a little bit longer to see the ROI than you would normally see with, like, let's just say, social media
Yeah.
ads. And what do you
No,
think
no,
about
no,
that, Nicole?
absolutely. And you have to know that you're monitoring them, right? They're very open about the fact that they started podcast advertising before all of the analytics programs came out, before Spotify even was holding podcasts, right? And so they use things like UTM parameters in their URLs. They use things like affiliate codes to find out if where they're spending their money is actually going. And one thing we forgot to even mention here, Tamara, is that their budget is about
Oh,
$2.2
yeah.
million a month, not a year, a month on podcast advertising alone. Now, I did the math. And even though their valuation is over $1 billion, they are about a $240 million a year revenue company. And that comes out to about 16% of their yearly annual revenue. And generally, companies want to spend between 10 and 17% on marketing growth. So they are right in that sweet spot. And especially when people always like scoff at me when I say that, Athletic Greens is doing it, and you can
Yep.
see where the success is coming.
Well, I think, you point out the budget, and that's something that I always like to talk about when you're planning out your strategy or your marketing strategy, is knowing your margin, knowing what budget you have, because you're talking about just what they're spending on ads, but all of these ads that they're putting out there on podcasts have an affiliate link, right? Purchase, your first month and get what is it, $10 off or 10% off? I can't remember what it is, 20% off,
Mhm.
something like that. But that's part of the cost of your marketing,
Yep.
right? So you've got to take that off of what you're going to lose, and possibly just have, that customer for
Mhm.
1 month. So you lose a little bit of margin there. It's obviously still worth it. But as you're planning out your strategy, you have to be aware of these things. You can't just, do like a buy one, get one free, and then, be out a ton of money, or make no revenue for that month just because you're trying to get new customers. So I think that's always something to think about when you're planning out your strategy.
Really great point.
Nicole, what is the podcast
Yeah.
strategy that they
So,
have?
if you want to start thinking about using podcasts, maybe you've done your buyer personas, like Tamara said, and you realize that your buyers really do listen to podcasts. You want to try to start doing some podcast strategy. The first thing that I would say is to make sure that you have a plan of attack. Otherwise, it's going to get really expensive really quick. And make sure that you have a budget for podcast advertising, right? There are other ways to get on podcasts that don't cost money, like advertising. They may not have the same effect, but if you don't have a budget, then we should probably stay out of this arena. But do your research.
Some people go on podcasts,
Mhm.
right? Some people do like the podcast
Yes,
circuit.
there and those are earned media, right? Those are ways to earn media for a really inexpensive price. Do your research and find podcasts that cater to your ideal audience. So this is something that the CRO of Athletic Greens was very passionate about. Is that they spend a lot of time making sure that when they sign a contract with a podcast, it's going to be a long-term investment, and that they are going to be with their ideal audience is going to be the perfect fit. So this doesn't mean my friend has a podcast, and so I'm just going to go pay for podcast advertising because everyone should hear it, right? Figure out your payment structure, your timeline, and your contracts. There's many ways to pay podcasts for their work, whether it's affiliate and they get a percentage of every sale. It's a one-time fee for mid-roll, end roll, all of those pieces, or other pieces, other ways, right? There, look at Tim Ferriss. He is a investor, so I'm sure he's helping in that way somewhat too. And make sure there's a timeline on this. How long are you going to try this before you pivot, before you measure, before you see success. And then contracts. Contracts are really important in this space. There's lots of ones out there that you can check out and get a really good sense of what a contract looks like for an advertising. How make sure you know how you're going to measure success. So what are the things you want? Now let's face it, with something like this, it's not, success is not just how many conversions you get, because the podcast host is not in control of converting your customers, right? The podcast host is in control of sending them to the landing page that then should be converting your customers. So just because you don't see revenue or orders doesn't mean it's a failure, right? You should be looking at traffic metrics. If you're getting a ton of traffic and then they're not converting, then maybe there's an issue on your
Yeah.
landing page. Uh, your campaign brief. So very often I hear people go into these types of engagements. They have not told the podcast host what that campaign should look like or what it should sound like or what the message should be. And so they don't see results because the podcast host kind of just does whatever they want
Yeah.
to do, right? So you should be having a campaign brief that talks about your brand, your how you want to be talked about, what the voice of the brand is, what the voice of the campaign is. And then reach out to the shows and don't forget to reuse the content. So this is really important. Once you're on the podcast, reuse it, put the logo places, do your own marketing for them, and there will be this relationship built, long-term game. I really love the idea of reusing content.
Yeah. Oh, reusing content is gold. I love all of those tips. And there's a few other things that we should talk about if you really want to harness the power of what Athletics Greens did, which is the other two things we talked about was know your audience and convert them into customers. So I'll tell you a little bit more about knowing your audience, right? Just because the podcaster has a demographic that should be ideal to your customer, like I said earlier, knowing how to message your ads is totally key. AG1 does this great. And they also let the podcasters, because of that trust, they let the podcasters add in things. They've always got space in their ads for add in your personal story or add in your impressions of AG1. You just said all podcasters should have the demographic information on their listeners, so don't forget to ask them for that. Make sure you A/B test messages based on key pain points that you're trying to solve, and the pain points for the audience members, and monitor your success and pivot when needed, but not too soon.
I love that. AG1 talks a lot about how they do troubleshooting, how they will stop campaigns and pause them based on seeing how much converting's happening. So if converting plateaus, they will actually pause a campaign on that show and then come back and restart it once converting then drops, right? So you're doing a lot of analytics here. So let's not mistake that because it's the long-term game, it means
Yeah.
less work. There is still
It's
work
not
being had. So, Tamara, oops,
It's
sorry, what
not
were you
set
saying,
it and
Tamara?
forget it.
Not set it and forget it at all. There's 5 people on this team who are just here looking at this. So Tamara, one of the things that I thought was really interesting that we don't talk about a lot when we talk about things like podcast advertising is converting the listeners into customers, right? We expect the KPI here to be orders, and it's really not the podcast job to sell your product. It's their job to get people to go to the link, go to the landing page, and then your landing page should be selling and converting the listeners. So make sure you have a good call to action. Make sure that you have an offer that they can use to get people to go over to your landing page. And then once you're there, make sure that the user experience is good and that the page converts. So it has call to actions on the page. There's no technical issues with the page, and track your lead sources. And that's the only way you're going to know where the listeners are coming from and who is
Yeah,
actually
so
converting
unique
for you.
URLs or affiliate links. Exactly.
Yep. And Google Analytics does really good at this. So you don't have to spend an insane amount on fancy software. So, with that being said, our takeaways from today from AG1 are a few things. So,
Mhm.
know your audience, right? We want to make sure we're hitting the right people. Make sure you have a call to action. Tell them what you want them to do. This one is one that's overlooked so often and it's so simple. Don't forget to measure your success. Otherwise, we won't know when to pivot. We will not know when what's working, what's not. And you're going to spend a lot of money. Make rules. What I mean by this is to make rules around when you're going to review stuff, when you're going to pivot, when it is a good engagement or a bad engagement, so that you're not making those calls on the fly. Convert your audience. So, not just expecting the host to convert them. And then we need some budget here and know that you're going to be spending money for a little bit before you may see any
Yeah,
results.
that's so good. And honestly, when I look at these key takeaways, the call to action, I feel like is one of our number one takeaways every show. Like, can't say that more. So important. And so, no, in general, with podcast advertising, there are winners and there are some clear misses or losers, you would say. And so Nicole and I like to go over this every time. What do we think are some wins and some losses and missed opportunities? So for me, the win in this is podcasters, right? With $2.2 million in spend, podcasters who have not only built trust and long term relationships with AG1 will be winning into the future. And AG1 actually builds in long-term contracts. So like if you are a podcaster, you want to get this contract, you want to get this partnership. And a loss is the wrong podcast, right? So it doesn't mean you shouldn't advertise on, and take chances on different podcasts, but it is a total miss if you just throw a dart and try and advertise on every podcast that you can. There's nothing worse than spreading yourself too thin. And Nicole, what are your wins and losses?
Yeah. So my win is MeUndies. So for a really long time, you either heard AG1 or you heard about MeUndies. That's it. They're on the same podcast. They used a very similar marketing plan to AG1, and they grew by 1,583% over 3 years with this similar marketing plan. So it works. But once again, both had a lot of VC money behind them. And then my loss is anyone using programmatic ads. So you may have heard the term programmatic ads. Basically, what it is AI, letting AI insert ads and technology insert ads into podcasts that they think are correct for you. There's one instance that American public media entirely disabled programmatic from their children's programming after AI added an ad for the sex lives of college
Oh my
girls.
God. That, yeah.
um,
Oh,
yes.
that.
So AI is great, but it has its glitches
All
still.
right, Nicole. So you and I work with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. And so, Athletic Greens, obviously, billion-dollar company, huge money, throwing money at this every month. But we want to talk about some tangible takeaways for small, medium-sized businesses. So if you are a small or new organization, start small and try advertising. Give affiliate links to save on your budget. Once you have some good content, don't forget to reuse it on social media and other marketing campaigns. So if you are going to do it, reuse it.
Love it. I absolutely love that, Tamara. And for established brands, make sure that once you hook a listener into going to your landing page, that is a good landing page that can convert them into a customer. Otherwise, we're spending a lot of money not getting any
Yeah.
ROI here. Well,
I'm going to
anyway,
get this
Tamara,
one.
I mean, I am so excited. I'm going to go drink my AG1 now because I'm feeling like I need some vitamins. Everyone out there, subscribe, hit the subscribe button for weekly troubleshooting and case studies just like this. Go download our situational report in the link below. Go get some AG1. I'll give you my affiliate link.
Oh,
There, Tamara.
boom.
Boom. We are marketers after all. They have to
And become
expect
a
it.
part of our community. Sign up for our newsletter. We'll be sending out special troubleshooting links and things like that. So join us, subscribe below, and see you next time.